It's everywhere you turn these days, right? Protect the environment, eat organic, buy sustainable. Like, we're all finally waking up to how we treat the planet.
Right.
But it makes you wonder, what about how we treat our own bodies? Do we have that same kind of respect? Or are we kind of stuck in this mindset of hacking, optimizing, maybe even like trying to transcend the physical altogether?
That's a good question.
And it's a big one, which is why we are diving deep today. We're turning to the work of theologian Thomas Storck to help us unpack this.
Okay.
Now, before you think, oh no, not theology, I promise, Storck makes this stuff incredibly relevant. He ties these big ideas to what's happening right now. Our obsession with tech, this whole body hacking movement, it's fascinating stuff, really.
He really does. He's got this way of connecting the dots between like ancient philosophy and what we're grappling with today. Like he'd say that throughout history, there's been this recurring temptation to sort of reject the physical world, to see it as flawed.
Flawed.
Yeah, or at least less important than, say, the spiritual. And he uses this ancient idea of Gnosticism as a prime example.
Gnosticism. Okay, for those of us who haven't cracked open our philosophy textbooks lately, what exactly are we talking about here?
So picture this.
Yeah.
You believe that the material world, and that includes our bodies, by the way, is inherently bad, corrupted somehow.
Yeah.
And that the true reality, the good stuff, is in some pure spiritual realm. We're all just like souls trapped in these messy physical shells. That's Gnosticism in a nutshell.
So kind of like wanting to escape the matrix, but for ancient philosophy.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Storck argues that this whole Gnostic impulse, this desire to escape the material world, it's not just some ancient history lesson. He sees it popping up all over the place in modern movements.
Right. I'm intrigued. Give me some real-world examples. How does this ancient philosophy connect to, say, someone today who's all about off-grid living?
Think about it. This urge to unplug, to disconnect from tech, from consumerism, from the whole system, to go back to nature, simplify, reject the complexities of modern life. That could be seen as a kind of rejection of the material world, right? A yearning for something purer, more authentic.
So they're not just rejecting the system, they're rejecting, as Storck might say, creation itself.
Exactly. And he doesn't stop there. Storck even argues that some forms of like radical environmentalism, the kind that see humanity as this virus on the planet, they can also carry traces of this Gnostic thinking.
Because it's that same kind of disdain for the material world, that same desire to escape what they see as corrupt.
Right.
Instead of embracing the created world, including our place in it, it's like these movements are still stuck in that Gnostic loop of wanting to transcend the physical.
Totally. And this desire to escape, it pops up in different ways. Storck uses virtual reality as an example.
Oh, interesting, because we're so eager to ditch these messy bodies and disappear into the digital world.
Yeah, it's pure Gnosticism, just, with better graphics.
It's kind of wild when you think about it like that. We're so busy trying to upgrade our phones and download the latest app. But are we even happy with, like, the basic hardware we're running on? I mean, do we even like being physical beings? And it makes you wonder.
It's a question we need to ask. And to really highlight how different cultures have approached this whole idea of the body, Storck brings up this fascinating example from Buddhism.
Lay it on me.
There's this Buddhist text that describes the human body as a great wound, oozing from every pore.
Wow.
Yeah, a bit different from the Christian idea of God, taking on human flesh in the form of Christ.
Talk about two totally opposite takes. One sees the body as this disgusting thing to escape from. The other sees it as worthy of divinity itself. It really makes you think, like, where did Western philosophy land on all this? What side did they end up taking in the battle of the body?
Well, it's been quite a philosophical tug of war, actually. And one of the big names Storck highlights in this whole debate is Thomas Aquinas.
Ah, Aquinas. Heavyweight champ of 13th century philosophy. What do you have to say about this whole body and soul business?
Well, to understand Aquinas' view, we kind of have to rewind a bit to the philosophical boxing ring he was stepping into. He was going up against some pretty influential thinkers at the time, the Augustinians.
Okay, time out for a super quick refresher. Who are the Augustinians again?
Right, so they were heavily influenced by the ideas of that ancient Greek philosopher Plato. And, they weren't exactly fans of the physical body. They saw the soul as this separate superior entity, trapped inside this material prison.
So the soul's the pilot and the body is like the clunky spaceship.
Yeah, basically. Soul good, body bad.
So last time we were getting our philosophy on with Thomas Aquinas and his revolutionary idea that the body isn't some kind of spiritual slammer, right? You'd think that would be a mic drop moment in history.
Right. Case closed.
But history had other plans.
Always, right? As Storck tells it, it does seem like for every philosophical action, there's that equal and opposite reaction. So just as Aquinas is pushing back against that whole soulless prison idea, here comes René Descartes in the 17th century, totally shaking things up.
Oh yeah, Descartes. The I think therefore I am guy. Wasn't he all about the power of the mind, like reason, logic, that kind of thing?
Exactly.
So how did that work out for the whole body and soul debate? Did he try to prove that bodies think too?
Not really. Actually, not so great for team body, I'm afraid. Storck points out that Descartes really doubles down on that separation between mind and body. He even goes so far as to call it angelism.
Angelism. Wait, like we're all just angels trapped in like meat suits.
Pretty much. Descartes thought humans were at their best when they were being purely intellectual, like detached from all those messy physical things that, in his view, just weigh the mind down.
So the total opposite of Aquinas, who saw those messy physical things as a huge part of what makes us human. It's like choosing between team body and team mind, but with like way higher stakes.
Absolutely. And that's where Storck's take on this gets really interesting. He argues that Descartes' philosophy didn't just affect how we think about ourselves, it actually impacted how we relate to, like, the entire natural world.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Help me connect those dots. How does seeing ourselves as basically thinking minds change how we view nature?
Well, if the mind is the ultimate tool, right, and the body's just this, like, inconvenient afterthought, where does that leave nature itself?
I guess it becomes something to be studied, analyzed, picked apart.
Yeah. Controlled, even exploited, all for the benefit of those brilliant minds, of course.
No, not a lot of tree hugging for Descartes then.
Not really his style. Storck even quotes Descartes as wanting a practical philosophy that would make us, and this is a direct quote, masters and possessors of nature. To him, the natural world was something to be mastered through reason, used for human advancement and all that.
And there you have it. The seed of the Industrial Revolution, planted right there in Descartes' philosophy. Is Storck saying there's like a direct line from this to factories and, our environmental crisis?
He doesn't explicitly say that, no. But he definitely wants us to think about that connection. Like, by putting the mind above the body and by extension humanity over nature, did Descartes set the stage for a totally mechanistic view of the world? One that was just ripe for exploitation? It's a good question.
It's like we got so into I think, therefore I am, that we forgot about I am a part of this whole web of life part.
Right.
But hold on, it wasn't all like cold calculating machines and factories.
Yeah.
Didn't someone try to push back against that purely rational scientific worldview? What about the Romantics?
Yes, the Romantics. Now there's a breath of fresh air.
They were all about feelings and intuition and connecting with nature, right?
Absolutely. Think like poets roaming through the forest, composers trying to capture the sounds of nature in their music, painters obsessed with sunsets and storms. That deep connection to the natural world. That was everything to the Romantics.
Yeah, it was like they were saying, enough with all the equations, we're going to go write poetry in a field of wildflowers. Team body is back.
Exactly. Storck really emphasizes that Romanticism was a reaction to that cold, sterile rationality of the Enlightenment. It was about reconnecting with nature, with emotion, with the experience of being human. They celebrated the beauty of, like, individual experience, the subjective, the feeling of being alive in a world that's just bursting with energy.
Sounds like a win for team body, right? Harmony restored?
Right.
Or was it?
Well, that's where things get a bit complicated. Because, you see, Storck argues that even though Romanticism had its heart in the right place, it was kind of lacking a certain framework. Yeah, like a solid philosophical foundation. It had plenty of passion, a real yearning for connection, but not a lot of, how do I put this, groundedness.
So all feeling, not a lot of plan. Did they just wander around in those forests, lost in their feelings?
In a way, yes. But it wasn't just about, like, getting lost in nature. See, because Romanticism lacked that firm philosophical grounding, it ended up kind of splitting off in all these different directions.
Oh, interesting. Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, on the one hand, you had this rise of beautiful poetry and literature inspired by nature. But then you also saw a fascination with the macabre, with the grotesque. Think like Gothic novels with haunted castles and creatures of the night. And there was a growing interest in the occult, in spiritualism, which, while definitely intriguing, could also lead to some pretty unhealthy obsessions.
Wow. So the pendulum swung from one extreme cold calculating rationality to the other, this almost like unhinged embrace of emotion and intuition.
Exactly. And without a strong philosophical foundation, romanticism just really struggled to find that balance.
So what was the answer then? How do you ground all that romantic energy?
Well, ironically, some thinkers within the Romantic movement, they found their answer by looking backward.
Backward to what?
To, you guessed it, Thomas Aquinas.
Aquinas. Always making a comeback. Seriously, what is it about his philosophy that just keeps speaking to people across centuries, even those who were initially drawn to Romanticism?
I think Storck would say that in the midst of all that romantic passion, some thinkers realized they needed more than just feeling and intuition. They needed a framework to really make sense of those experiences, to ground that passion in something solid, right? And they found that in Aquinas' idea of the human person, his understanding of the body and soul as two parts of one whole.
So even in that romantic rebellion against pure rationality, you had this more balanced, holistic view of humanity and our place in creation sort of taking root. Aquinas is like philosophical comfort food. It's satisfying no matter what century you're in.
That's a great way to put it. But like all good things, this period of philosophical peace, well, it didn't exactly last forever. Storck argues that the whole tension between embracing our physical selves and trying to transcend them, it just keeps intensifying as we move into the 20th century.
And this is where we get to what Storck calls the ultimate expression of mind over body.
Yes.
Okay, so now we're in the 20th century, right? Huge societal shifts, technology exploding. Where does Storck take us from here? How does this all connect back to the body?
Well, he starts by looking at the sexual revolution. That whole push to, embrace the natural body.
Which on the surface seems like a total 180 from what we were just talking about with Descartes, with all his distrust of the physical.
Right.
Because free love, back to nature, that's very body positive, very romantic even.
It does seem that way. But Storck, he points out this really interesting contradiction. He argues that this whole movement for liberation was kind of built on a foundation of contraception, and later on the widespread availability of abortion.
Because those technologies are really about controlling the natural consequences of sex, right? Not necessarily celebrating the body itself. It's like saying, we love the body, except for this one specific function.
Exactly, and that's where he brings it back to Gnosticism, that ancient idea we were talking about. He's basically saying, okay, are we really embracing the body in all its fullness, or are we just picking and choosing the parts we're comfortable with, the parts that, align with our desires?
So instead of accepting the body as it is, this very good creation, like Aquinas would say, it's back to seeing it as raw material, something to be manipulated, like Descartes, but with, hormones and surgery instead of just equations.
You got it. And Storck argues that transgenderism takes this whole body as a project idea to, its ultimate conclusion. It becomes the final expression of mind over matter. The physical self is just something you can design at will, molded to match some internal vision instead of being accepted as part of our, created nature.
It's like saying, this body doesn't match who I feel myself to be on the inside, so I'm going to change it until it does. That separation of mind and body that we keep bumping up against, but taken to a whole other level.
Exactly. Storck even quotes this author, James Green, who celebrates transgenderism as this step towards being freed from the yoke of sex and gender, which again goes back to that idea that who we really are is somehow separate from and maybe even superior to these physical forms.
And that brings us all the way back to Storck's central question, doesn't it? If we can just pick and choose which parts of our bodies we accept, which parts we try to change, are we really honoring creation, or are we just stuck in this pattern of rejecting the physical, trying to transcend it, control it, even remake it in our own image?
That's the heart of it. And I think Storck would be the first to say, there are no easy answers here. He's not trying to shut down the conversation or condemn anyone. He just wants us to be aware of these deep philosophical and theological currents that have shaped how we understand what it means to be human, to exist as embodied beings in a physical world.
It's like he's handing us this incredibly detailed map and saying, look, humanity has been wrestling with these questions for centuries. Here's where we've been. Here's where some of the paths lead. Now, what are you going to do with this information?
And that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating. They don't really give us easy answers, but they do give us new questions, new ways of looking at all this.
Totally. It reminds us that these debates we're having about technology, the environment, our bodies, they're not just happening in a vacuum. They're connected to these long, winding philosophical conversations that go back centuries.
Conversations that, as Storck shows us, Or maybe more relevant now than ever.
So the next time you're strolling and you see, I don't know, an ad for the latest biohacking gadget or a news story about gene editing, maybe take a second. Remember Aquinas. And that radical idea that the body, with all its messy complexity, maybe it's already pretty amazing just as it
It's
is.
definitely something to think about, especially as we try to find our way through this ever-changing world of technology, identity, just figuring out what it means to be human.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for this embodied being to go grab some pizza, for purely philosophical purposes, of course. Thanks for diving into this with me. Until next time.
Anytime.